Beware, as you might run into a spirit or two at these abandoned ghost towns. Located up in the Bodie Hills in Mono County, California near Yosemite, in 1859 4 miners found a good place to look for gold in the hills near the California-Nevada border. Bodie died in a blizzard not long after, but a small mining town sprung up at their camp. The town was home to 10,000 people. Bodie was a mining camp in 1859 where people had seen gold in its hills. Eventually it turned to a well-populated town. Though, like most mining towns, it saw its peak, its losses, and then its decline. Fast forward to 1962 and the town would be fully abandoned. Although it already showed signs of decline with dwindling numbers at the start of the 20th century. A series of fires forced the last remaining residents to flee the town, leaving it almost exactly as it was in the early 1900s. Dinner tables are still set up, shops are still stocked with supplies, and restaurants are still poised to serve long-forgotten meals. Today, the 110 silent buildings sit spaced out for traffic and people that aren't there. Buildings such as a barbershop, a church, a mill, a morgue, and a leaning hotel is held up by a beam have been left untouched for 100 years. Though since it has been left and abandoned for years, some of the buildings are in crumbling state of decay, while others stand strong, full of their original items but long devoid of their owners. There were also 16 saloons and thus a fair amount of danger. People were robbed and crimes occurred quite often, though the curse of Bodie has nothing to do with the fires or the shootings. It started because people started taking artifacts from the abandoned buildings. They take weather-worn shoes or pieces of glass from shattered windows. Somebody once ran off with a piano. Those items may seem like they have no value, but all objects carry equal significance in telling the story of Bodie. Thus, the curse of Bodie emerged, where if you take something from Bodie, bad luck will come around to get you. Because of the rumor spreading of a curse, people who stole items would send them back, often including heartfelt apology letters explaining that they didn't expect their fish to pass, or their romantic life to tank from stealing from Bodie. Coming in at number 4, we have Bannock, Montana. The once bright star of Montana is now a ruin, a town in arrested decay, with few remaining storefronts, saloons, and hotels. The town was founded in 1862 when a group of Pikes Peakers from the goldfields of Colorado set up camp on the banks of the creek. Finding gold, the miners staked claims and promptly failed to keep the find a secret. By the spring of 1863, the area boasted a population of 5,000. By 1864, Bannock had started to fade, losing importance. The remnants of the past still exist with empty buildings and weathered wood. Today, over 60 structures remain standing, most of which can be explored. The town is known as a site for paranormal activity. It is known that ghosts of the abandoned town walk the streets of Bannock. The most common ghost story, though, is the story of Dorothy Dunn. In August 1916, Dorothy Dunn, her cousin Fern, and a friend waded into a dredge pond and stepped into deep water, but none of the three knew how to swim. Luckily, a passerby was able to save both Fern and the friend, but Dorothy was not as lucky. Today, the site of the tragic drowning is referred to as Dorothy's Hole. Sometime after the accident, Bertie saw a ghost of her friend upstairs in the hotel of the town. She recognized Dorothy by her long blue dress. Although Bertie rarely discussed the sightings, other visitors began to report seeing the spirit of a young girl in a long blue dress in the window of the hotel. Others have reported cold spots, and some have reported trying to speak to the girl in a long blue dress. Bannock was filled with adult workers, crimes, murders, and of course the notorious sheriff and outlaw Henry Plummer, whose vast gang terrorized and robbed southwest Montana for years. Henry Plummer was handsome, well-dressed, and charismatic. He was also able to gain the trust of the area miners and was soon elected sheriff of the community. However, little did the citizens of Bannock know, but their new sheriff led a secret band of road agents called the Innocents, who began to terrorize the travelers between Bannock and Virginia City, robbing and ending more than 100 men over the next several months. Once caught for his terrible actions, Henry Plummer met his fatal end at the hands of the town's citizens. Today, many say that the ghost of Henry Plummer haunts this old settlement. Perhaps he wants to avenge his name. In at number 3, we have Thurman, West Virginia. The historic town of Thurman, located in the heart of New River Gorge, was established by Captain William D. Thurman in the 1880s. Captain Thurman passed in 1910, but the town continued its growth. During its height in the 1920s, the town was flourishing with a number of businesses and facilities in the railway industry. Thurman had 2 banks, 2 hotels, stores, a cinema, and offices. Yet after a series of setbacks, Thurman soon went from boom to to bust. A number of factors played a role in the town's slow decline. The first problem was the increased rail competition and the emergence of cars. Then in 1930, a fire that led to the closure of the biggest hotel in the town, the Dunglen Hotel, only furthered the decline. The final fate of the town was the Great Depression, and by 1950 Thurman was a ghost town. Thurman saw a small revival during World War II when coal was in high demand, but it was not enough. Afterward, the coal fields began to play out. Today Thurman stands at just 5-person population, which is why it is nearly vacant ghost town, as the remaining residents either move on or pass away. The house and the land it sits on became the property of the National Park Service. Walking around Thurman today is a sad reminder of the countless other boom towns which once thrived with human activity, but today are silent and forgotten. Many buildings have long since disappeared, either torn down or, as in the case of the well-loved hotel, burnt to the ground in suspicious circumstances. Many of the family homes lie in increasingly decaying condition, while some have disappeared altogether, leaving only behind a white picket fence and wildflowers which still blossom untended each year. The eerie atmosphere of Thurman led many visitors to believe that this almost abandoned town is haunted. In at number 2 we have Cahaba Ghost Town. Alabama is home to many small towns. While some of these towns have very few residents, others are true ghost town because they've been completely abandoned. It's no secret that small abandoned towns give off an eerie vibe. As a matter of fact, one Alabama ghost town in particular that fits the bill is Old Cahaba. The small town of Old Cahaba is located in Dallas County. From 1820 to 1826, this small town served as Alabama's first state capital. Before the Civil War, Cahaba was a busy trade city located at the junction of the Alabama and Cahaba rivers. Over the years, floods and decay have affected this historical town. Thus, by 1900, the town was completely abandoned. Today, Old Cahaba is Alabama's most famous ghost town. Many buildings still stand, like the church, schoolhouse, and some houses. However, they have been left untouched for decades. You can still walk the streets of Cahaba and see the ruins and abandoned buildings, but make sure to keep your eyes peeled for the ghostly orbs that have been reported to appear in the garden maze at the home of C.C. Peggs. Additionally, many locals share similar ghost stories from the ghost town. While it's known that Cahaba is filled with paranormal activity, one groundskeeper that works at the new Cahaba cemetery has reported hearing voices as they worked. While tourist groups claim to have recordings of unusual sounds, and others say they've captured unexplained lights or shadows in photographs. Another site that's reportedly haunted is the Barker House. This mansion was built in 1860 by Stephen Barker and contained slave quarters behind the house. After people started leaving the town in 1870s, the house was bought by Samuel McGurdy Kirkpatrick. It burned in 1935 and was rebuilt, but today it's in pretty bad condition. The only people usually left inside are paranormal investigators. Reports from said investigators include seeing a ball rolling across the floor on its own, and a stuffed animal appearing to communicate with something else in the room. But the most well-known haunting in Cahaba is Peggs' ghost. Colonel Christopher Claudius Peggs was the leader of the 5th Alabama Regiment and was wounded leading a charge at the Battle of Seven Pines in Virginia in May 1862. He died from his wounds 2 months later, on July 15th. As the story goes, a couple were walking behind Peggs' home in the spring of 1862. As they walked, they spotted a ball of light. They tried to touch it, but their hands went right through it. It disappeared, but later came back and followed the couple. Due to all the mysterious crimes that happened in association to Peggs, seeing an orb around his former house is considered a bad omen and possibly even a supernatural warning. And finally, in at number 1 we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. Located in a quiet valley of Columbia County, Pennsylvania, is one of the state's least likely and least publicized tourist attractions. Centralia, Pennsylvania, once thriving with 14 active coal mines and 2,500 residents in the early 20th century. But by the 1960s, its thriving business and population hit a decline, and most of its mines were abandoned. Still, at that point, over 1,000 people still resided in the town, and Centralia was far from dying until a coal mine fire began below. In 1962, a fire started in a landfill and spread to the never-ending coal tunnels that miners dug thousands of feet below the surface. And despite repeated attempts to extinguish the flames, the fire still burns to this day. 20 years after the fire started, however, Centralia, Pennsylvania began to feel the effects of its underground fire. as residents started passing out in their homes from carbon monoxide poisoning. The trees began to die and the ground turned to ash. Roads and sidewalks began to buckle. But some residents didn't want to leave despite the health risks, and for the next 10 years legal battles and personal arguments between neighbors became the norm. The local newspaper even published a weekly list of who was leaving. Finally, Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain in 1993, by which point only 63 residents remained. Officially, they became squatters in houses they had owned for decades. In 2013, the remaining residents, which were fewer than 10, won a settlement against the state. Each was awarded $349,500 and ownership of their properties until they die, at which point Pennsylvania will seize the land and finally demolish what structures remain. Coming in at number 5, we have Ross Island. Located on an island in India closer to Southeast Asia than India, the island is known for beautiful beaches, unique marine life, coral reefs, and largely undisturbed forests. But beyond the island's beautiful views and stunning wildlife lies a dark past. Ross Island is one of the 572 islands that make up the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Now, the island is a ghost town where the remnants of a 19th century British settlement lie in ruins. In 1857, reacting to an unanticipated Indian revolt, the British Empire chose remote islands as the site of a penal colony, and Ross Island was one of them. The British first arrived in 1858 with 200 Indian convicts. The deadly task of clearing the thick jungle fell upon the inmates, while the officers stayed on the ships. Moreover, the development and town built at Ross Island began in 1858, and the prisoners were forced to build its buildings. The island was transformed to resemble a British town, with houses, offices, clubhouses, bakeries, stores, churches, and everything else that the British would not miss when they were away from home. The British ruled Ross Island for more than 80 years, up until nature was against the development. In 1941, a gigantic earthquake affected the island and left the town on the island completely ruined. The British thought rebuilding the town would not be worth it, and overnight left the island in complete ruins. Abandoned in the 1940s, the island is now being reclaimed by nature. Homes, a massive church, ballrooms, and even a graveyard all are in varying stages of decomposition, being taken over by an unyielding forest. In at number 4, we have Tlingua, Texas. Near the Mexican border, you'll find the town of Tlingua, Texas. In the 1800s, it was discovered that the area in which Tlingua was built was plentiful in cinnabar, a red mercury sulfide, from which mercury can be extracted. This caused an influx of miners to the area, but it wasn't until Jack Dawson's discovery and production of the area's first mercury in 1888 that it drew a population of 2,000, and by 1900 there were 4 mining companies in the area. When the Chiso's mining company opened in the mid-1800s, workers and their families quickly relocated to the Tlingua, Texas. The Chiso's mining company was founded and began operations in 1903 near Tlingua, Texas. The company specialized in the extraction of quicksilver and mercury. In 1799, Charles Harvard discovered that compounding the element produced fulminate mercury crystals, establishing its marketability. These crystals are useful in the production of gunpowder cartridges and shells. Mercury production had peaked during the First World War but began to fall, thus Chiso's mining company had filed for bankruptcy and the miners began to trickle out. When the mine went bankrupt in 1942, Perry sold it and moved away. The population was around 3,000 at its peak, though it said that everyone up and left the municipality in the 1940s once the mercury was picked through. Thus, the once busy city became the ghost town we know today. It is now home to 110 people. By the end of the war, it was an abandoned ghost town. In at number 3, we have Kott, Alaska. A once flourishing town with businesses, shops, a train, and a lively community is now left as a ghost town. The town of Kott in Alaska was flooded with people after copper was discovered in 1900. After the discovery, a group of wealthy investors formed the Kott Copper Corporation to mine the mountains above the Kennecott and Root glaciers. In the 27 years the mine was in full operation, the company and town grew significantly in fortune and people, and at its peak Kennecott employed 600 people. But by 1938 the copper was mostly gone, the mine was shut down and the town was left abandoned. The town was abruptly abandoned by its citizens, leaving most of their possessions behind. Since the middle of the 1950s the place had been completely deserted, with with the railroad discontinued service that same year. Reports of ghosts along the abandoned tracks of the Kennecott train have been claimed for decades, while other visitors report having seen old tombstones along the route of the tracks, though the gravestones then vanish by the time the visitors make their return trip. Others have reported hearing disembodied voices and phantom children laughing. Reportedly, a 1990s construction project were halted after workers were scared away by the creepy sounds and unexplainable events. In at number 2 we have Aun Tunich, Belize. I hope that's how you say it. Deep in the jungle of Belize lies an ancient ruins of an abandoned town that has been left to crumble. The town has been left abandoned for over 1,000 years, though before the abandonment of this large and populated town, Aun Tunich was a thriving metropolis. The first construction at the site dates back to sometime in 200 AD, with the growth of the town continuing until its final days of functioning as a city. The town grew to consist of many temples and palaces, including its largest and most recognizable, known as El Castillo. Aun Tunich has lied abandoned since around 1000 AD. It is thought that due to consistent devastating events such as an earthquake and other natural disasters, caused a sudden evacuation of the large Mayan city around 700 AD. The disaster caused extensive damage to the main pyramid of Aun Tunich. Although the city was reoccupied sometime after, it only remained active for another 300 years before it was left completely unoccupied. After abandonment, the site remained empty, eventually being encapsulated by the surrounding jungle and nature, until it was rediscovered by explorers in the early 1890s. The name Aun Tunich comes from the ghost stories that have haunted the ghost town for years. The ghost story of Aun Tunich is rumored to start in 1893, after the first sighting of the ghost happened. The first ghost sighting goes as one morning a man who was part of a research team working on the site saw what he described as a Mayan maiden ascending the staircase of the Aun Tunich's main pyramid. This vision caught him by surprise, so he continued to watch as the woman walked further up the stairs. Suddenly she stopped and turned to look at the man, where he was able to get a glimpse of her glowing red eyes that pierced his soul. She then turned to continue her climb to the top of the pyramid, where she would disappear amongst its stone columns. The shocked man quickly assembled a team to search for this woman, yet no trace of her was ever found. Since this sighting, countless more visitors have reported to also spot the ghostly maiden who haunts Aun Tunich. She is always described to be ascending El Castillo's stairs. To this day, the sightings and reports from visitors continue. The ghost frequency is what gives Aun Tunich its name, which translates to the Stone Lady in the Mayan language. Some believe that this Mayan maiden have formerly lived within the city many years ago. Others believe that she was a human sacrifice, trapped to relive her last moments of ascending to the top of the pyramid where her ritual would have been conducted. Then there are a few who believe her to be some sort of ancient godly spirit linked to the site and the Mayan culture. And finally, in at number 1 we have Calico, California. The ghost town of Calico can be found in California, midway between Barstow and Yermo. The beginning of the town started in 1875 and was built under the impression that there were prospects for silver in the Calico Mountains. But in the spring of 1883, many of the local miners left Calico when borax was discovered 3 miles east at Borate, though Calico again boomed in 1884 as additional silver discoveries were made. Gaining a population of some 2,500, the town supported 24 saloons and gambling dives that never closed, as well as more establishments such as the church, public school, dance school, and a literary society, along with dozens of retail businesses. By the late 1800s, Calico was bustling with prospectors searching for their fortunes, and the Calico mining district became one of the richest in the state. Calico's final decline began when the price of silver fell in the 1890s, but the break production kept it alive, even through the panic of 1906. They tried to hold on, and borax for a time substituted for the shiny metal that had been Calico's fortune. Calico kept churning out valuable minerals until it finally exhausted its supply in the 1920s. Calico was soon abandoned and left to gradually decay in the desert sun until little remained, but in 1951 it was purchased by the Walter Knott, an ex-miner, and rebuilt as a modern ghost town. He restored the town to mostly how it was, in certain cases rebuilding some of the old structures as they were back in the 1880s. Considered one of the top haunted locations in California, Calico has its fair share of ghost stories, when one of the most active and known ghosts of the abandoned town is Lucy Lane. Lucy is often seen in a black lace dress walking back and forth between her home and store. Others have allegedly seen phantoms